This just into CBS Sports HQ, where Houston Texans running back Joe Mixon is going to miss an extended period of time due to a lingering foot injury. That's according to NFL Network. Mixon began camp on the NFI list and didn't participate in the Texans' offseason workouts. No word yet on whether Mixon will be ready to go for week 1 of the regular season, which comes September 7th on the road against the Rams. Mixon coming off his 5th career 1,000-yard season in 2024, adding 11 touchdowns along the way. Our NFL analyst Tyler Sullivan tapping in with us once again. Sully, not the news you want to hear for a guy who's kind of had some injuries impact him in the past. What do you think about this news?
Yeah, it just adds another question mark to this Houston Texans offense that is going to enter the season with a lot of change. I think coming off of last season, you're moving on from an offensive coordinator. You've completely reshaped your offensive line this offseason. It's a whole entirely new left side of the offensive line for C.J. Stroud. And now we have questions about the backfield. The good news is that we are in late July, right? So there's time between now and September 7th and week 1 for Joe Mixon to get healthy and possibly be on the field. But there's some questions now because Nick Chubb is the next man up in this backfield. And, you know, he comes with some question marks as well. So you go down the list here and you say, okay, there's so much potential with the Houston Texans. Obviously made the playoffs the last 2 years with C.J. Stroud. He's emerged as one of the bright young quarterbacks in the NFL. But we have some questions around him. Like I mentioned, the offensive line. Even look at the wide receiver room. They bring in Christian Kirk. We don't know what he's going to look like. They draft 2 wide receivers. You have Tank Dell dealing with his injury. The only real certainty there is Nico Collins. So, yes, on paper, there's a lot of talent. There's a lot of things to like with the Houston Texans this season. But you're looking at a team with a very tough schedule, questions on the roster, now questions in the backfield with this injury to Joe Mixon.
Just a lot of changes going on in Houston right now, to your point, Tyler. And obviously, when you look at the rest of the running back room, you mentioned Nick Chubb, but he is also a guy who you have to be cautiously optimistic about when it comes to the injuries. If we get to a scenario, and this is a big if because they are expecting him to be okay week 1, but if we get to that point and it's like, I don't know, who should Texans fans maybe be looking at in that running back room to be a splash guy to take over some of those reps?
Well, I think that's why they sign a guy like Nick Chubb. I think it's kind of a low-risk, high-reward type of signing. It's not like they broke the bank to bring him in, obviously dealing with injuries over the last few years as a member of the Cleveland Browns. But you bring him in as your depth piece, as somebody that is at least given the history of being a bell cow back in your backfield. I think when we looked at them when everybody was fully healthy, you say, okay, this is a pretty good two-headed monster here that you have out of the backfield, at least in terms of experience in Mixon and in Chubb. And if both of those guys are running on full cylinders, then okay, this is a capable backfield. I think we have to be cautious with Nick Chubb. I think we can't necessarily assume that he can take on a full workload in terms of being the bell cow back that we remember him with the Cleveland Browns. But can he be serviceable in this scenario where Joe Mixon is not ready to start the season? Or at the very least, if Joe Mixon is not ready to take on a full complement of touches out of the backfield. I think that's maybe one of the benefits of signing a guy like Nick Chubb, especially now that we know that Joe Mixon is not going to be available at least for the bulk of the summer. It's going to allow him the time to really get his feet going and really get a bit of a chemistry with this reshaped offensive line. So you bring in Nick Chubb for situations like this, but we'll see how it all develops.
And of course, factoring all of that into C.J. Stroud, he's got to have a big year as well this year when you think about, I'm going to call it the drop-off because we know that there were some issues last year that weren't all his fault, but there was a drop-off from year 1 to year 2. So now you go into year 3. There's even more adversity for C.J. Stroud during training camp here. How does this sort of impact the mindset of him? How does he sort of reassess and reset himself, knowing that his running back room is kind of struggling right now?
Yeah, no, it's absolutely true. And this is where you get to prove yourself as the franchise quarterback, as the cornerstone, as the buck stops with me type of figure within your organization. Because I referenced it earlier. C.J. Stroud is the constant. Nico Collins to the extent as well. But C.J. Stroud is the constant of this offense for the Houston Texans. It's an entirely new coaching staff, or at least at the offensive coordinator position. Entirely new left side of the offensive line. Now there's injuries to the backfield. He is someone who's going to have to help this team weather the storm. And this is going to be the first of many storms in 2025. Of course, that's what happens with every one of these teams. But for CJ Stroud, he is just going to have to be that kind of that weather vane for the organization. That the wind's blowing in different directions, but he's the one pointing them in the right direction. So I think that they'll be able to kind of handle this in the immediate. If this becomes a long-term issue for Joe Mixon and he's not able to play multiple games to start the year, then maybe they bring in some outside guys. We'll have to see who those are, see who becomes available. But if you're CJ Stroud, you look at it and you say, okay, well, I'm going to have to maybe lean on a little bit more of the quick game to start the year. Maybe we start to use a guy like Christian Kirk out of the slot to kind of be an extension of our running game, make those high percentage short throws, yards after the catch. That's a possibility there. That could also help your reshaped offensive line not necessarily have to block for you too long. So there's a lot of facets here, a lot of still questions that we're still trying to figure out here with Joe Mixon in terms of how long this injury is going to progress. But CJ Stroud is someone who now has a little bit more pressure onto him going into year 3.
At least, like you said earlier, it is still July. There is still plenty of time to answer those questions. And Tyler Sullivan, we appreciate you helping us navigate all these questions down in Houston. The NFL and the Houston Texans are set to return to CBS on September 7th. The Texans going to take on the Rams, 4:25 Eastern. So make sure you catch that game or any game for your favorite team on CBS and streaming on Paramount+.